Welcome back to the Rock Your Comeback podcast. I'm your host, Nichole and I'm super excited about the guests that I have for you today. If you want to understand men and their emotions, like this is your guy. I am bringing in DJ Logory. I said that right. I feel really proud of myself because we just had a 10-minute conversation about how to pronounce his last name. He's the creator of the Be That Guy program. He does mental health and emotional regulation and discipline and consistency and confidence for men. So I'm ecstatic to have you.
Well, thank you so much, Nichole, for having me today. I'm very excited to talk about a topic that guys typically do not want to talk about when it comes to emotions and how they feel. And I'm very excited to dive into all this.
Tell me how you got into this because I think most men culturally, right? It's a taboo topic.
Oh, yeah. Nobody wants to talk about how they feel and emotions and all those things. But long story short, I was a young 21-year-old young man and struggling with life a little bit. I had just lost a job. I thought I had like my whole life kind of figured out for the next 5 years. And I was fired from a job in a very interesting way. And during that time, I was going on social media a ton and I was seeing all of my friends like make so much progress with their lives. They were getting in relationships, they were getting these first big jobs. And I was kind of like, what did I miss? I thought I had all of this outlined. I thought I kind of knew what I was doing. And what ended up happening was I was working out one day and I saw an old basketball coach of mine named Scott Gibbs. And he walked up to me and he said, Deej, I said, hey, Coach Gibbs. He said, how are you doing? And I literally almost started crying. Like I literally almost started breaking down. Like, and I will admit that I was a 21-year-old guy. I was like, I'm not doing good. Like I need some help. I don't know where to go. I have like I'm paying rent now on things. Like I got bills and I'm like, and I have no money. And I was I was directionless at that point of my life. And so he sat with me that night for literally like 3 hours and he just asked me questions and he was there for me. And I like to use the term, this is a Simon Sinek term, but he sat in the mud with me. He didn't try to fix me. He just let me talk. And in that moment, I felt the best I had felt in the last like 6 months of my life. And so I reached out to him like 2 days later and I was like, hey, could we do that again? And he was like, yeah. And so we met at Starbucks and had another conversation. For the next 3 years, he was basically mentoring and coaching me through stress and mental fitness and confidence, discipline, all of these different things. And at the end of the 3 years, I was like, there's got to be other guys or people in the world who would love to just experience what this is. And so at that point, we decided to start our parent company, which is called Acres of Diamonds. And so Acres of Diamonds is a mental fitness and leadership business. And so what I ended up doing was throughout my mid 20s, we did corporate mental fitness training. And so we helped these teams improve their emotional intelligence. And so as I started to do that, what ended up happening was when I was around 24, 25, I had a mom reach out to me and she said, hey, my son is 17 years old and he seems to be struggling with all the things that you've figured out. And I remember being like, hey, I'm still trying to figure these things out. All right. I'm a work in progress. And she said, could you work with my son? And I said, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. Like, I just want to make sure that you're okay with that. And I said, I can help your son with discipline, consistency, and confidence. I said, those are the three things that I've kind of focused on. And I have some ideas that have helped me and maybe they'll help your son. And so I started working with this young man. And as I went through my 20s, other parents started to reach out and I started to kind of build this small little group of guys who I was working with on mainly on one-on-one basis. And as I went through my 20s, I realized that that was the thing that really lit my soul up. It really made me feel like I had a purpose, really made me feel valued. And I loved like helping these or just being there for these young men. I mean, sometimes they just need to talk through some things. And towards the end of 2024, so in like August of 2024, I made some big decisions financially and basically said, hey, Acres of Diamonds is running. We found the right people to run all of our corporate mental fitness trainings. And I said, I'm going to go full in on building a community for young men of guys to help each other and support each other within these areas. And at the time, I had no idea what to call it until one session I was working with a young man and he said, I just want to be that guy. And I like kind of stopped and I was like, be that guy who what? And he's like, I want to be that guy who can do hard things. And I was like, okay. And he goes, I want to be that guy who knows how to manage my stress. And he said like four other like be that guy statements. And I just kept writing them down. And I was like, be that guy. I was like, okay. And ironically, I had another session with a guy right after that. And he said almost the exact same thing. He said that be that guy statement, then he filled it in with the thing that he wanted. And so then I just wrote it down again. I said, this is what this is. I said, this is a community of men who want to be that guy, and then you fill in the thing that's important to you to become. And so that's essentially how I kind of got into this. And we've grown it to, I think we have about 18 guys in the group right now. And I got a goal of 50 by the end of the year. So, we're pushing towards that, but it's been super fulfilling and it's helped me a lot personally as well.
What do you feel like are the biggest patterns that you see that men are needing to unlearn right now?
It's a good question. I think the first one that comes to mind is comfort. I think a lot of men, specifically just young men, just from what I've seen, they seek comfort over discomfort. And so comfort looks differently in a lot of different scenarios. But I mean, a lot of it is, hey, I'm going to stay in my room and play video games because that's very safe and nothing's going to hurt me there. Comfort is I'm going to have a not that great of a diet because it's really easy to order food to my door and not eat grilled chicken, steak, and fruits and healthy things like that. Comfort is talking to people on their phone or in communities like Discord and Reddit and all these things instead of getting out into the world and talking to a real human face to face. And so I think a lot of this is just because of the way that these young men have been raised. I mean, I'm 29 years old. I got my first phone when I was in seventh grade, and it was a flip phone. And I remember it was like 75 text messages a month or something like that. And so these guys get their phones right when imagine if they're in seventh grade and they're getting an iPhone and now they're connected to every single person in the world through social media. They have thousands, if not millions, of different influences that can start to pull them in different directions. And I got Instagram when I was 21 years old, when I was a sophomore, junior in college. And so I was a little bit more mature to start to handle this, yet it still hurt me a ton going into my early 20s. And so I think just a lot of this has been um, kind of breeded from younger individuals just having access to more earlier. So they just see more things. Like I was talking to a young man yesterday. He's a trainer actually for a high school football team here in Tampa, and we're possibly doing like some partnership stuff together for his team. And he said that a lot of the guys when we were talking, he said a lot of the guys feel this sense of like entitlement, right? And it's I think a lot of it is just because a lot of things have been easier in right. It's easier to order just food to the door, right? Or it's easier to talk to somebody via text. And I think it's not their fault. It's just what was there. It's just what is available, right? And so I think there's this big comfort crisis or priority crisis that I think we're trying to deal with right now.
I think that's true for men, but I think that's universally true, is that we have this need to just return to the things that are comfortable. We have the dopamine hits from our phone. We have all of this extra things that our brains, I think, are evolving. But I think they're actually, I had this conversation with my daughter yesterday. I think that like the phones are creating such like ADD with
Yeah.
our attention that the discomfort takes a minute to actually focus on and latch on to so that you don't automatically return to the comfort. So, what do you suggest for that for people who are playing video games, who are scrolling on their phone forever, who are binge eating or whatever the case? How do we shift into discomfort in a way that's like manageable and doable with the way the world is set up right now?
I've been asking myself that question for like the past couple of months where like so one of the things that I thought about was why. Like if I asked myself, if you asked a young man, why are you spending 6 hours a day on video games? Just to see like what they would say, right? Hey, it's entertaining. It's connecting me to other people. I think a lot of our priorities for especially for these younger men is just based upon the fact that they might not have anything else to do, or they might not be aware of something else to do. And so I've asked young men before, where there was one example I was speaking to with a young man, and I said, tell me what your day looks like, right? Because one of the things that when we talk about discipline and consistency, a lot of it comes down to where does your time go? And how can I be better with managing my time? And managing your time is almost just more like prioritizing your time, like what's important to you and why. And so I asked him, I said, walk me through what your day looks like. And so he had basically woke up for school at 7 a.m., went to school, came home at 3 p.m., and then played video games from 3:30 to 1:30 in the morning, like just the whole day. And,
Yeah.
and I said, my first thought was, oh my God. I was like, how can you handle that much stimulation for that long every day? And I said, okay, I said, if you were to play like 2 hours less, I was like, what would you do just like with those 2 hours? I was like, would you go to bed? I was like, what would you do? And he said, I have no idea.
Mm.
And it just like was silent. And I was like, you have no idea. I said, all right. I said, what if you didn't play the video games at all? I was like, how would you spend your time? And he said, zero idea. I'm like, okay. I'm like, what are the things that you could do with your time? And so then we started like slowly going through, hey, I could learn this skill, I could exercise, I could read a book, right? Like these little bit more leveraged activities to be have a little bit more meaning and a little bit more significance in the things that we do. So I think to come back to your question, right? I think asking it yourself why, like why am I actually doing this? That might lead to a little bit of clarity where it's like, maybe I should change this up a little bit.
I like the idea of actually really getting to know what it is I want to be doing with my time. What are my options of how I want to spend my time? I think you and I are similar in the ways that I have a really strict like morning routine, and I also just have somebody was joking around the other day. They're like, "You have the most hobbies out of anybody I know," and I like to learn things. Like I like to dabble, but I think that there's been times in my life where I've been so caught up in either work or just even being like addicted to my phone or social media that those things are so easy to go by the wayside. And so, what would you put on your list of things that you want to try or do? Like, let's give the people some ideas of other ways that they can spend their time if they're listening to this and identifying like, shit, I am in a comfort mode. I'm not growing in my life. I'm not feeling good. What ideas can we give them? What can they do with their time instead of doom scrolling, playing video games, binge drinking on the weekends?
So my first initial thought is the fundamentals. All right. So I'm very big on the fundamentals of eating, moving, and sleeping. And so I think that one of the things that I realized is I had a friend ask me once, they were like, if you could do anything with your life, what would you do? And I said, I would be a professional eater, mover, and sleeper.
I love
I said I would just prioritize those things. And so I think with the time that we have, I think it's very important to have some movement each day, right? 30 minutes or minimum, get your heart going, sweat a little bit. I think that's very important, not only for the way you physically look, yes, yet I also think the way you mentally feel. And I also think your self-image starts to improve just by exercising. I think the food that you put into your body is very, very important. I think we essentially are what we eat. And I think also the food that you put into your body reflects what you think about yourself. And so I think a lot of the times, if young men are eating really bad, I'm often curious, do they think they deserve to eat better? Right. And then you start to get into some deeper things about like self-worth and self-image. And so I'm a big proponent of I like to eat meat, I like to eat fruit, and that's and protein shakes and things like that. I try to stay away from the sugars and things along those lines. I very rarely drink, maybe once a month. Um, and then the sleep is have a bedtime and have a wake time and make those your number one priority. I've found that sleep is like this absolute cheat code. Great book, everybody to read, Why We Sleep. I'm actually rereading it right now by Matthew Walker. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal book. So I would have a specific wake time or specific bedtime and wake time, and I would keep my phone out of my room. So then you say, all right, at 8:30 or at 9 p.m., I'm in my bed, going to sleep and trying to get to sleep, because eventually I think we get better at actually sleeping if we try to actually get better at sleeping. So those are the first things that came to mind. Second thing on spending your time when it comes down to like hobbies is I'm kind of thinking back to like when I was in that 21 to 26 age range. How did I spend my time when I had that time? Um, a lot of what I did was education versus entertainment. And so, like, what skill can I learn? What course can I take? There's these awesome sites now in YouTube. I mean, there's so many things you can learn and get good at that become income generating skills that is so affordable and it's so readily available to anybody. I mean, you could listen to a podcast and it's free, you learn something, you go make money. It's like that was free knowledge essentially, right? I mean, regardless of your time. But one thing I would do is there's this one website called Udemy, udemy.com. And it's like just this site of just all these different courses that people can take. And so I took like an NLP course to teach myself neurolinguistic programming. And it was awesome. It was like $17 and it taught me all of these things. It was way more than I actually even thought it was, like all of the content. I did some other trainings around leadership. I did trainings around mental fitness, trainings around human optimization, and all of these things that I just thought was interesting that I would want to get better at. And then it transferred over into like YouTube videos, and there's all these different YouTube channels and YouTube Academy of things you can learn and then go implement. And I think it's important too to get outside and go for a little walk every once in a while, get some fresh air and listen to a podcast, listen to an audiobook. One of the big things that I'm a big proponent of is reading. And reading actually was recommended to me by a friend of mine who I really trusted. And I didn't like reading. I was like, I got ADD. I was like, I can't read a book. I need to go do something. And he said, he goes, start reading. And he said, readers are leaders. And that really stuck to me because I was like, man, like I want to be a leader. I perceive myself as a leader. And I was like, I should probably listen to him and start reading. And so I started reading more, and it was enjoyable just because I was learning things. But I think the underlying real value of what reading gave me was it exposes you to more words and exposes you to more sentences and paragraphs and pages and chapters. And I think over time, what happened was I started to speak better because I was reading more. And I've had many people say, "Oh, you're so articulate in the way you talk about things, or you're so well spoken." And I'm like, it's because I have hundreds of books that I've read, and I'm comfortable now with actually talking better because I'm just exposed to it more on a daily basis. So I would say off the top of my head, those are some of the things I would spend more of my time on as a young man.
What's your top two to three books that you just would read a million times over?
So the first book, hands down, is Gap and Gain by Dan Kennedy and Dr. Ben Hardy. Um, Simple explanation of the book is it's essentially how very successful people do they measure their success in the gain, which is basically everything that they have accomplished, or do they measure their success in the gap, everything that they haven't accomplished? I think a lot of the times we can notice everything that's going wrong in our life and everything that we don't like versus everything that's going great and everything we do like. And so that's a great book to read just to change the way that you think about where you've been to where you are versus where you're not. My second book is Deliberate Discomfort by Jason Van Camp. It's a huge respect to the art of doing uncomfortable things and what that does for you. And I read that book. That was one of the first books that I really started to read. And I remember reading that book on like a Friday night when all my buddies were going out to the bar. And they asked me, they're like, you coming? And I was like, nah, I really want to start reading this book. And they like kind of busted my chops about that. And I remember saying that out loud and being like, all right, that's a change right there, right? The fact that I'm kind of staying in, I really wanted to read this book. They're going out. And I remember reading that book and watching like all of these people walk by my window, like down to the bar in downtown Rochester, and thinking to myself, like, this is going to be worth it someday, right? Like me making this decision right now, learning about discipline and discomfort, like just right now, this is uncomfortable. Just right now, this is discipline, right? Like actually reading that book. But I absolutely loved that book. It's written by a bunch of Green Berets, Army Rangers, and Navy SEALs, and they just talk about um, combat experiences and how it and like the decisions that they made to be deliberately uncomfortable. So I love that book.
Now, you were talking in the beginning about feeling like you weren't quite where you wanted to be, right? And you're 21 years old, you want to be somewhere you're not, you're looking at all your friends. I think we are all guilty of this. Like we're all, in the process of building something or creating something or becoming something, and we're staring at everybody else and they're fucking already there, or they're doing it. They're somehow they have a secret formula we haven't figured out yet. And what I'm also hearing is like there's choices that you made to be uncomfortable, to not just go to the bar, to wake up early, to how do we bridge that gap between the process of like sitting in the discomfort forever and not being hard on ourselves because we're not there yet?
So I think along that path, we have to forgive ourselves. And I think, and this is one of the things that I talk a lot with the guys who might have had some challenging things happen in their past and they don't want it to dictate where they're going. And frankly, I try to be very careful about talking about past things because that's like, I like to focus on where they are and where they want to go. Um, Yet sometimes I ask them like, you know, if you were to forgive yourself for whatever that thing was, like, what would that sound like? And I think being a little kinder to ourselves along that path and realizing that I'm not always going to make the right decision in that moment. I'm not always going to be as disciplined as I want to be. Um, Discipline is really more about trying your best to stay on a certain path because you know you're going to get knocked off of it. Right? If somebody's been 100% disciplined for their whole life, I would say they probably aren't trying hard enough things. Right? So I think we have to realize that we're human beings and we're going to be sad sometimes, and we need to breathe as good as we can during those times. And I think that we're also going to have some really high times. And we also need to remember like that's also going to pass too. So I think the best way to remember, kind of like where you're going is it's a stop, not a stay, right? It
Mm.
might just be a stop along the way. I don't have to stay there. I can stay there if I decide to stay there and I drop into that victimhood mentality, or I can make a change. And that starts with you first wanting something more of yourself and being inspired to do so. And it starts with motivation and it finishes with discipline.
I think sometimes when we talk about discipline, it's very Green Beret. It's very David Goggins, right? It's very like, get your shit done. I don't care what you've been through. And I love that you're like putting in that real component because we have to hold compassion for ourselves. Because if we're doing discipline as a form of punishment, it's different than if we're doing discipline as a form of self-love.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what you were talking about earlier of like, okay, why are you not worth that extra time for yourself? Why are you not worth eating well? And asking those harder questions and bringing that compassion and forgiveness to the conversation. It's I think society doesn't set men up to be compassionate. So how can we as women, because that's my audience, right? How can we as women help men be more compassionate with themselves?
I had somebody ask me a question similar to this a little while ago. And I said, I personally believe that the number one thing that a woman can do for a man that would probably help with compassion is believe in him. And I think that's what will separate that guy deciding to wake up a little bit earlier that next day. Or maybe stay a little bit later to make a couple extra calls, but still make sure he makes his kid's soccer game, right? Whatever that looks like, eating the grilled chicken instead of the pizza. Um, I think that belief, because I think sometimes as men, at the end of the day, we're in our own heads, right? Everybody's in their own heads technically, yet we know the things that we did do and the things we didn't do. And to have a your partner, right? Let's say girlfriend, wife, whatever that is, that person who you have decided to give a piece of your life and share a piece of your life with, when they say, hey, like, I believe in who you are, like at your lowest lows, like I'm going to be right there with you. And at your highest highs, I'm going to be right there with you. And that's the stuff where it's like, I'll run through a fucking wall for you at that point. I also do think though, a man needs to put in enough effort for the women to say, hey, like, I believe in you, right? Like he has to, like, it's a two-way street type of thing. Um, and that's why I think a lot of these young men who might be lacking this ability to give effort or do harder things, I think later on down the road, that might lead them to a really lonely life, right? Or a lack of relationships, whether it's with friends or a romantic partner. So I think I think you can solve a lot of challenges in relationships, in life, in your own personal identity and discovery of it by giving effort towards something, like in actually trying.
Do you feel like your relationship with discipline is equal to your relationships in general? Like, do you feel like there is a direct reflection of your ability to be disciplined within yourself to what kind of friendships and romantic relationships that you actually have?
I think in order for me to show up the way that I want to in those relationships, I have to be disciplined to myself. And I believe that I have to become a product that other people want in their life. And like, and I think about this all the time. It's like, what are you bringing to the table? Right? Like, are you the funny guy? Are you the strong guy? Are you the like what is the thing that you bring that I'm like, oh, I want that guy on my team, or I want her on my team, right? That's something where I think that's where it's like, I want to make sure that I'm good so that I can be good for you. And if I can elevate myself to a 9, 10, and you see me kicking ass and leveling up, maybe that might do something for you, right? Maybe you might say, hey, I saw a DJ at the party. He was just drinking water. He wasn't even drinking alcohol. Maybe I should think about something else, right? Not saying everybody needs to stop drinking. Um, but I do think that there's a level of respect for your friends, your romantic relationships, even your business partnerships that requires you to be good enough for them and to take yourself serious for them too.
I'm a firm believer that like the world is your mirror, and that the way you do treat yourself, it does tend to like I love the way you phrased that. I thought that was beautiful, and that there is a level of like respect that you get to have for yourself and who you get to be in a relationship. And I think that's the exciting part, is that we're always growing in who we are, and we're always learning new things about ourselves, and we're always deciding what new things we get to bring to the people we love in our lives. And I think that that's the thing people forget. You were talking about being the victim and playing the victim earlier, and I think that a lot of people get into these relationships and they're the victim of it instead of the decider of, how do I want to show up, and is this enough for me?
Mhm. Yeah. I think and this is where I think people confuse being selfish with being like self-discipline, or however you want to phrase it. Um, I had a mentor of mine once say that being selfish is a strategy, like actually taking the time for yourself to make sure that I'm healthy with my mind, with my body, spirituality, emotions, all of that. So then it's a strategic move. So then I can show up and be this person where they're like, hey, DJ's here. I'm really happy that he's here. Right. Or hey, Nicole's here. Yes. Like we have to take that time. We don't just magically, I think, become these individuals that people are attracted to. I think there requires some concentration and a little bit of focus and time on task. And I think that builds character, and I think that builds self-respect.
What do you wish that women understood better about men and their emotional world?
We have to feel safe. We have to feel like we are not going to be looked at as a weak man. The three P's, which I've learned from Scott Galloway, um, protector, provider, and procreator. Those are the three P's of a man. We are wired to protect, provide, and procreate. And when the word emotion gets brought up, I think we immediately think of crying. I think men immediately think of emotion means crying, and crying means unstable, and unstable means I'm unable to protect.
Okay.
And if we can change the wording, and this is where, like, to have a guy express his emotions, I think instead of using the word emotions, I think using the word experience. Like, what are you experiencing right now? And having the guy be like, dude, I feel horrible. It's like, all right, what does horrible mean? It's like, I don't know, I'm stressed, I'm anxious. All right, so what are you stressed? And now, boom, now he's talking about why he's stressed and anxious. And so I think as guys, experiences are a little bit more like, I could say, dude, that was a great experience. We just went to that football game last year. We went to Vegas. We did this, we did that. Or that I could also frame that in a way where it's like, what are you experiencing right now? And he might accidentally start talking about his emotions. So it's kind of like that backdoor thing into, hey, I can get you to talk about your emotions almost on accident. Um, and yet I think that's where I automatically feel a little safer when I'm talking about experiences, because I haven't associated it with emotion and weakness and not being able to provide. So women, I don't know if this is something you want to try out. Just be like, hon, what are we experiencing right now? And just see like where that guy goes. Maybe that'll help. It's something that I'm starting to use more with the guys whenever I can sense there's some emotional thing. Just be like, what are you experiencing right now? And just let them sit in it, and then they'll kind of go a little bit deeper.
I love this because I talk a lot about word choice and how when we're like thinking positively or manifesting or whatever, that sometimes we use words that don't really resonate with us,
Mhm.
and and then it doesn't connect. It has no emotional relevance to you or to your life. And you're kind of saying the same thing, except for there's a negative association with the word emotion or with like, what are you feeling, right? So we can approach the same fucking thing in a new way
Yeah.
by just trading out some words. Are there anything else, like other things that come to mind when it comes to like creating safety with the men in your life?
So the strategy that I always use is I will take the first step. And this might be something, I don't know, I've never really, I mean, I've talked to a lot of women about this just because I've always just been curious, like, what are guys missing, or why are we messed up, or why are you like, that's the disconnect here. Um, but one of the things that I have found that really helps is I will be vulnerable first. And vulnerable is another one of those words that guys have associated with weakness. And the replacement word for that I'm starting to use is personal honesty. And I start to ask guys, and like yesterday when I was talking to this one guy, I was like, are you willing to be personally honest with yourself right now? And I'll even sometimes precursor that with, are you tough enough to be personally honest? So now I've built in some masculine terms into a typically weak term of vulnerability. And I often ask the guys, like, who's the tough guys in the room here? And like, right, and you'll have the guys, right, I'm the tough guy. It's like, great, are you tough enough to be personally honest with yourself right now? And just to see like where they start to take those things. And so a lot of the times if I am having like a group session, or even if it's just a one-on-one session, I will share first and say like, hey, here's the thing that I've struggled with, right? I struggled with thinking I was weak. I struggled with thinking I was a loser. I struggled with thinking I had no idea how to have genuine conversations with women. These are the things that I've struggled with. I struggled with self-image. I struggled with confidence, all of those things. And here's the story, and I'll tell a story about it. And they will typically empathize with me, and they'll be like, dude, I'm sorry that that happened. That's horrible. And I'll be like, well, what about you? Are you just going to leave me hanging here? And then they'll be like, well, and then they'll kind of go into something. So I think once you've broken down that barrier of, hey, like, we don't got to be, all on right now, right? Let's like, let's get deep into some stuff right now. And I've noticed that when you get guys into a safe enough zone, they'll go there, and they'll go there pretty hard, because I think it's like they've been waiting to actually express it. And it's just a matter of providing that safety. And I don't even like to say, hey, this is a safe space, because you still kind of feel it's like it's just an honest, like, just be you right now. Right. Like, I don't care how great you are, how many followers you have, how many girlfriends you've had, how much money you have, nothing. you're a human being at the end of the day, and a lion will kill you any day, right? So it's like, I'm here, right? So like, let's just talk as men. And once you kind of rip those barriers down, then it becomes a little bit easier for us to really kind of express what we're experiencing.
I love that. I want to add to that because when I was doing, I'm a mental health therapist by degree and trade. And when I was doing traditional mental health counseling, teenage boys were my nightmare, to be perfect. I like love that you're like, yes, let me dive in. But I found if their hands are busy, we would always be building something, playing cards, doing something. If their hands are busy, their mouths will talk
Mm.
almost every time. And so I found like that for men, for me, or for teenage boys, or even guys in their 20s, like if I could get their hands moving, I could get their mouths talking. And I do think there is something to be said about like that, you know, bilateral distraction, whatever you want to call it, right? Is that we can get into a place where we're not thinking as hard about what it is. We're actually like, if I'm like, hey, talk about your emotions, it's different than like, well, what were you thinking when that was going on? And we have something else going on that was like helpful too. So just putting out there for anybody who needs that. But
Have you ever seen the video of the guys? So I completely agree with that strategy, but there was a social media video I saw once of guys were like tossing the football back and forth, and they were like starting to get very emotional and talking about like their relationships. And it was like you give a guy a football and just have him go toss with his buddies, and he'll tell you like his deepest, darkest secrets. And so I completely agree with that strategy.
yeah, and even like walking, even just going for a walk with somebody and like having that movement and honestly, like we just process better when we're in like a physical emotion. We're clearing out energy. There's a lot that can be done with that too. But this has been a really beautiful conversation, DJ. I'm so grateful that you came on today. Do you have any last like words of wisdom or anything that you feel like you want to close out with?
Um, for any of the young men who are feeling alone, you're not alone. I think it's just important for them to realize that there's a lot of young men out there who are quietly struggling, and they believe that asking for help or being interested in changing is a weakness. And I want it to be looked at as an advantage for these young men to be in groups or with other men who want to help, just want to be there and support these guys in their progress. So for any of the women listening who have sons or know young men, just tell them that they're not alone, and that they can change and that they can be better.
And send them DJ's contact information.
Yeah.
I will drop everything in the show notes. But where's the best place that people can reach out to you?
I would probably say just Instagram, so they can just follow me on Instagram at DJ Logory, Logory, which you said correctly, Nichole, fantastic. And you can just shoot me a DM message. That actually seems to be working the best right now. And then you can look through all of the content that I post each day, and it'll kind of give you a little introduction to some of the things that we believe in.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Send this to a friend. Send this to a guy in your life who needs to hear it because DJ's your guy. Thanks for swinging by.
Awesome. Thank you, Nichole.